We have to wait a few seconds to allow other people to join. I mean, it is being broadcast as a webinar anyway, and people will pick up on this later. So let's give it a few moments. Okay, I just want to say thank you to everyone for coming and joining us for the fireside chat of MapCamp. We've fascinating day for me. Started off with Charles talking about pip decks and the use of mapping and awareness in strategy. We had talks from Sarah, for example, in terms, Sarah's a consultant with Leeds Hospital, about the use of mapping in the NHS. Then, we've had Kat talking, and Kat's here with us in this fireside chat, talking about resilience and exhaustion. It's just been an amazing wander through different areas, but all connected to this sort of idea of understanding your landscape, understanding the environment, be willing to challenge what we're doing and the assumptions we're making, and also thinking about perspective, the way that you're looking at a problem. Because as much as I like mapping, and I use mapping in all sorts of different areas, there are many different ways of looking at the same problem from many different perspectives, and they're all useful. I like to often combine them together. And of course, we've got Dave Snowden, as many of you know, the Kinevin framework, and also more recently S-Stream mapping. But so we've got Dave and Kat, but I'm really, really delighted to say we've got Roger Martin as well. So Roger, I probably didn't say this, wrote a paper which really transformed my way of thinking about stuff, really fundamentally. And it was all about the execution trap and how we sort of try and separate strategy from execution. And so then a bunch of people in an ivory tower go, I come up with a strategy and it didn't work. Well, it's your fault because you didn't execute it in the way that I envisaged it should be executed. And if you think about it, it's complete madness, but we've been sold on this line. And I suppose that's where I want to start, by asking the question, what's wrong with strategy today? And I'm going to fire that one open straight away into Roger. Do you want to start us off?
Sure, and I'm glad that paper influenced you. I feel like I'm going to go to my deathbed not having convinced hardly anybody of my point of view on there. So you've given me encouragement to be sure. What's wrong with strategy? I think it's become a lost art. There was and I'm talking about business strategy. I mean, military strategy and some other fields of strategy are going strong, but there was a movement that I think goes right back to Bruce Henderson, founder of Boston Consulting Group, who was the father of strategy in my view of a real business strategy. And for about 20 years, there was this practice of saying, you've got to make a bunch of choices that all integrate together to produce a particular outcome. And so I say strategy is about making an integrative set of choices that produces a desired customer outcome, because you can't control the customers, so you've got to compel them to do something. That was overtaken by planning, which has been around for a long time, eons. There's been planners who say, well, we've got to make a list of the stuff we're going to do, and we're going to, in the corporate context, it was, we're going to get all the executives around the table, we're going to ask manufacturing, what do you want to do? Marketing, what do you want to do? Sales, what do you want to do? And then we'll make a list of things, and that had always gone on. And the problem with that is that they're not integrated. There's not a coherent theory behind them. This strategy Bruce Henderson and then Mike Porter came with this alternative view, and for about 20 years or 30 years, 60s, 70s, and 80s, it had a moment in the sun. But then just with the steel-toed boots planning, people just said, no, this is about planning. It's easy to do. We have a methodology for doing it, getting everybody together, making a list and calling it. And now, thanks to this thing called strategy, we can call it a strategic plan rather than a business plan. And strategic is really sexy, and it's cool, and it's new. And so
and it sounds like a fraud.
Yeah, yes. 90% of all things that are called strategy are not strategy now. So it's becoming a lost art, and it is strategy is barely taught anymore. Weird stuff is taught in the universities. The so-called strategy consulting firms want to do post-merger integration, overhead cost reduction, all stuff other than strategy. A recent McKinsey partner told me that it's down to 3% of their revenue strategy. So that's what's wrong with strategy. It's disappearing as a thing.
Wow. So strategic planning is dead, or should be, but it isn't.
Well, yeah, strategic planning has conquered. It's came, it saw, and it's conquered, and it's won. And so boards of directors insist that you have a strategic plan, and companies dutifully put together strategic plans, and then they convert them to budgets, and they make forecasts about how much money they're going to make on that. And then when they don't, inevitably, they yeah, they'll say to the board, yeah, but you approved our plan and things just didn't work out the way it was. Chance, random, outside events. That's what it is. Like this competitor decided to do this thing, or customers didn't like what we wanted to sell them. So it's not our fault. We were dutiful, and we had a strategic plan that you approved. So that just cycles.
So, Dave, do you agree? Is strategic planning dead, or should be?
Strategy's dead. Strategic planning is alive and well.
Oh, unfortunately. All right, but are we saying that strategic planning should be dead because it's not really strategy, it's just a fraud?
Yes.
Yes.
And I'd agree with that, all right? But I want to qualify it a bit. And I was a strategy director, and then I ended up being acquired by IBM and realized that all corporate strategy is just savage politics and ruthless, stabbing people in the back. And if the idea it's strategic and thought through just doesn't work. You have to play the politics, all right? And the reason you hire McKinsey's is so that you can actually blame them if something goes wrong and you won't be fired. So just to be really cynical about it, right? And I think the key thing, and certainly where we're working at the moment, is there's absolutely no point in having a strategic plan or a set of strategic choices, for example, to be the best producer of cacti if you live in a paddy field. So we're saying, your first thing is to get the situational awareness right, and then start to see what are the evolutionary potentials. So this is complexity over systems thinking. Systems thinking says, where should we be? How do we close the gap in the main? Whereas complexity says, where the hell are we? Where can we go next? And what's the energy cost of that? So I think, the big thing we're working on is first is understanding what's called the substrate. That comes from constructor theory and physics. What are the energy gradients of the present? And therefore, where can't you go and where can you go? And can you initially change the substrate so the things you want are more likely to happen and consume less energy before you get into any type of planning structure? So that's making choices about the environment and the direction. I think the other big thing we're looking is how the hell do you manage? Because what I want to do is start to combine grand strategy and tactics in the same frameworks. Because in a modern world, things are just moving too quickly. You can't have these linear processes from one to the other. And that means we've got to look at the granularity of the actions we're taking. And most finely grained actions don't need plans. Yeah. I think the other big thing, and we were talking about this before we came on, is most of these times, companies are operating in the tail of a Pareto distribution, where you can't actually use past information and you can't use structured thinking. You've got to find, and this is the stuff I worked on for DARPA, for John Poindexter of all people, it's called the problem of abduction. Is how do you make objective, intuitive insights from large numbers of people so that you can find pathways that other people haven't thought of? And that's still the big thing that, we started in DARPA, we carried on with the Singapore government. So I think the key thing I'd say, it's all about the substrate, and it's all about managing the substrate and then responding when things start to go in the right direction or the wrong direction. And if you have plans, you ignore weak signals, almost by definition.
Yeah, it's choice making, and that's why I don't like distinctions like this is strategy, this is execution, this is strategy, this is tactics. I don't buy any of that. The question is can you make choices that turn out to be better than average, right? Like rather than just completely random. And so I have much sympathy with what you're saying, Dave. The other thing, I guess, because for me it's the business context that I'm interested in, and the great variable that you cannot control as customers. And so part of what I believe about strategy is you are better at it to the extent that you are more in tune with your customers. If you talk to them, listen to them, interact with them, don't ignore them, all of those things, I think, and use your terms, I think that helps you understand the energy gradients better than taking a random point of view.
I'm
sorry, Sam,
incredibly biased. Hang on a second. I'm incredibly biased, and of course I love this stuff in terms of let's understand our environment, let's think about our customers, let's think about how involved. But before we get there, because Kat, you did a talk today about how we love action, and what we need to do is stop doing stuff and start to observe more, which seems to chime into this sort of idea. I'd like to hear a bit about that. But before you do, if you can weave in this whole idea of strategic planning, who's to blame? What's the real source of all our problems?
Why do you put that on me?
Because you
I need
always
to
know the
find
answer.
out who to blame. I'm good at assigning blame. Isn't that the problem of strategic planning, that we all as human beings love blame so much? Yeah, so my talk earlier, if you missed it, shame on you. But it was all about noticing, and basically in service of what Dave was saying about those weak signals, and things are moving so quickly. So we have to build the capability within ourselves to notice for ourselves the weak signals, because surely if we can't notice them for ourselves, then there's no way for us to communicate any of our noticings to anyone else. And, then I hope that the next step after, if folks are able to notice in themselves after my talk today, then maybe they can communicate that noticing to others in some sort of more mindful way, as opposed to just like regurgitating things, right? And being able to question. I think a key, we have said the word coherence a few times, right? And I think even places that I've seen that have something that resembles a strategy, because I'm not so cynical as Dave, and I believe that there are some limited places out there that has something that resembles a strategy. But I think we have become, ironically, very poor at achieving like horizontal coherence, even in places where vertical alignment is very good. It feels weird to say that in a time when we are more connected than ever. Like, we can't achieve horizontal coherence. How is that even possible? Like, we have all the tools. Yeah, so I don't know. And as far as assigning blame, like, who knows? I mean,
I thought
who
you were going to say
knows?
Aristotle.
I mean, yeah, I would love to blame tons of things on people who aren't here to defend themselves. That's the real ticket, that if you're going to assign blame, you should assign it to someone who's not currently
Who
here.
is long gone. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Fan-
Uh-huh.
Gosh, so many interesting threads to these conversations. So, Roger, you were talking about choices, and choices matter. And
Yeah.
we've talked a little bit about, we've talked about strategic plans. We talked about them as being detailed plans and all the rest of it. That seems to be all a big fraud, which a whole bunch of people make money from, but it doesn't seem to be very useful for us. They're not actually thinking about the environment. There isn't the situational awareness. They often don't actually understand the landscape at all. And then you say choices matter. Do you mean we just need to be lucky?
No, I mean, luck never hurts, but no, I guess what I strive to do in the world of strategy is to help people be better than lucky. But if I may, I'd like to pick up on Kat's point, because it relates a little bit the way the way I think about life. Like I think if you're going to be a good strategist, you have to build models in your mind, right? You have to model the world that you see around you and then act on the basis of that model. Lots of it is abductive, to your point, Dave. I mean, abductive reasoning. I'm a great Peircean fan. Is absolutely critical. If you depend on inductive or deductive reasoning, good luck to you. You're never going to do anything interesting. But how do you keep on building and enhancing and growing your models, the sophistication of your models over time? Well, I think it is, as Kat said, by listening, right? One of my most beloved academic mentor was Chris Argyris, who said we spend most of our time advocating and very little time in inquiring, and inquiring is sort of the moral equivalent to Kat's listening, I think. And so I think that if you want to be a strategist, you have to say, I need to build a model of the world in which I need to take choices, take actions. I need to build a model of that. It can't be static. It's got to be ever growing, ever agglomerating. You agglomerate on other things. I hear something Kat says, and I say, oh, here's how I can fit that in. Here's what Dave says, I can fit that in. Here's what Simon says, I can fit that in. So that hopefully you develop a model of the world in which you're operating that is ever more powerful, and then you can be better than just lucky. Are you going to be perfect? Hell no. Steve Jobs wasn't perfect. He managed to make a whole bunch of really bad choices, but he made enough really good ones, and I think he had a model of the universe and technology in that universe in that time, and made some better choices. I don't know if that even answers your question at all, Simon, but that's where my head was.
Anybody, any thoughts on that?
I'd want to pick up on that, I think. I mean, a couple of comments. First to Kat. I mean, the cynics are the people in the organization who care, because they're prepared to stand up and say things. And yeah, the sort of stand out of my light response to Diogenes, I think, should be a model for all strategists, the executive power, right? But that's a personal thing. I think there's a couple of things. First of all, you can manage for serendipity. You don't have to be lucky, right? And part of that is sensitization to weak signals, but that isn't an individual thing. It can't be an individual thing, because you're only spotting about 5% of available data, and you're using your past hallucinations on that. I mean, that's why outlier detection is so key. The famous thing about the 17% of radiologists who do see a gorilla in X-rays, whereas 83% don't see it because they're not expecting to see it. So I think you have to manage the context of sensory data so that outliers become visible very quickly, and then people can make choices about that. And I think the model thing, this is an interesting argument at the moment in complexity circles, because the danger with models is you test a model for its accuracy in predicting the future. I think we're more talking about frameworks. You create frameworks which you can adjust and add things to, but you don't necessarily say they're predictive. And this is a philosophy.
Fair enough.
But it's an important distinction.
Yeah, if you want to use framework as I have no quarrel with that. That's this sort of ever adjusting framework. I just don't want random action, right?
And I agree.
I don't want a theoretical action.
If you look at levee walks in nature, I mean, it's one of the areas we're looking at. Most optimization in nature happens without a directing intelligence, like forming levee walks. And starting to translate that into organizational strategy is one of the things we're working on. But if we come back to abduction, I mean, the classic, you've got the Peirce stuff, all right? Bateson's stuff was about metaphor. Our stuff is about abstraction. And I think this is one of the concerns we've got. So, I mean, I'm moving into a different field now. We know that art and music came before language in human evolution. And we think the reason it continued to evolve is it breaks the pattern of the materials, so we see novel connections. Which is why I, for one, am really worried about the focus on STEM education in universities, because it's breaking that capacity you
I
think,
know.
and only if your parents are rich you will be able to study how to govern. It's like a 19th century model.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, it's part of the desire. Yeah, the desire for orderliness in an unorderly world is causing us to do all sorts of things that are just kind of systematically bad for us, and that's one of them.
I mean, we talk a lot about messy coherence, and companies need to be happy with messy coherence.
Mhm.
Everything's entangled, but you need to be able to find pathways.
Yeah.
But don't
And
worry.
if you're looking at weak signals, right? If you're spending your days looking at weak signals, there is only one kind of logic to use.
Yeah, exactly.
Abductive, right? So if you don't believe and are taught, which you are taught in virtually all business and engineering programs, that there is no such thing or it's stupid, then why would you ever pay attention to a weak signal and say, I know there's only one of them, but it's pretty damn interesting. How could I explain that? That's what I try to teach my students. Find something that's as anomalous as can be, and then try to explain it. Practice.
Yes.
But aren't all these problems going to go away? We're going to have our lovely, wonderful little AI assistant, which will tell us what to do, and we can spend all our time in leisure. That's certainly what I've been hearing from Bill Gates.
That's what I'm planning on, just total leisure and let ChatGPT do all of my work. It's exciting prospect, honestly.
I had a big argument with Sam Polizano in IBM, all right? And he said, we can use AI to get rid of all middle management. And I said, where the hell do you think senior management is going to come from if you do that? So there's all sorts of things AI can do better than us, but if we don't do them, we don't develop the higher capability anyway. And yeah, you know this, Simon, my worry is with AI is we'll lose abductive capability. We're not actually very good at inductive logic as a species. We evolved for abductive logic, but we could lose the capacity if we stop using it. But
Any
it's
thoughts?
fundamental error a lot of AI people make is they assume you can change the container on human consciousness, and you can't, because our containers are part of our consciousness. Right? And again, that's an issue. So if it comes out, you're doing multiple micro hallucinations of your own experience, other people's experience, imagination. And those have been entangled with sensory data. And we don't even understand what all the sensory data is yet that we use. It's certainly not just text, right? And we make decisions based on that. And that's a human capacity, which we could lose unless we watch it. Sorry,
I have a question for the audience. Is that okay? Can I address the question to the
Of
audience?
course, it's a
Why not?
chat.
Anything goes. It's a fireside chat. Okay. How many of you now, when you're writing something, you write the first line and then you have a line break and then another line break and you start writing something? But I have noticed this style now. It's like the first line is like, have you ever heard one of Dave Snowden's hot takes? Question mark, blank line, and then the body of the message. And I wonder how many of us realize that that is something, that is a behavior that we didn't have even a few years ago in large part. Why? Because algorithms on social media, they reward clicks. Click is an engagement with a post. So what did people start doing? Like whether they realize it or not, they asked that spicy question, right? The clickbait question. So we had clickbait with like blog posts. Here's the headline. I'm going to click it. Then it seeped into just the way that we write things, because on LinkedIn now, if you write your first line like this, and then you have that blank line where people have to click in order to read the rest of it. I've seen the most ridiculous things where people just write like 3 words and then new line. And but that is because the algorithm rewards clicking. So you structure your writing, your actual language in a way that will get clicks, whether you realize you're doing it or not. You're just being conditioned. When I write this way, I get clicks, I have more impressions, I get engagement. And I think that that's an interesting thing for us to consider as we think about AI, and that we are in the system with AI, right? And it is acting back on us. We are acting on it, whether it's that algorithm or it's an agent, it's an LLM, we're acting on it. And then it's acting back on us. So we very quickly end up at an extreme position. So we have talked about today at various times how the world is so interconnected, right? The system is acting on itself at a rate and velocity. We haven't seen this before. And then we introduce AI, which says, hey, I will even speed that up faster. I will increase this system's ability to act on itself. So then we end up in these really extreme positions. And I don't know if those extreme positions that will be produced by that are a good trade-off with having my line of code completed in a way that I accept roughly 40% of the time.
All right, I'm going to riff off that because that's so good. I mean, one of the things that is, oh, suddenly a whole bunch of beads fall on the floor. Sorry about that. One of the things that's interesting about AI is we talk about things like Copilot and AI assistants. So we're moving from, if you're looking in development, from an environment of development tools to one which are more conversational in nature. And this actually goes back to an old idea of Iona Freeman's, which was made famous by Nicholas Negroponte, which is the process of design is a conversation between the minds of one or more designers. And what's happening is the machine is now one of the designers. So our tool sets are changing. But the language we're using is changing. So, you know, a lot of coding language is quite declarative in nature. They are now things like prompts. So, you know, that is a programming language. If you've got memory, it's Turing complete. So the language is changing. And also the medium is changing. Because in the sort of past, it's all been code as text. But now code is also images. That's the seed for, you know, whatever you want to build. And we have done this in engineering departments where you have a conversation about a problem. There's two types of conversation. One that occurs on the screen, which is about the rules and syntax and style of the code, and one which occurs on the whiteboard, which is about objects, relationship, and context. So our language, our tool sets, and our medium are changing. And that's the equivalent of, you know, a tool set being the printing press, the language being the written word, and the medium being paper. And so what this means is language, tool sets, and medium are actually how we reason about the world around us. And what terrifies me most about AI, because I love AI, but there is one thing that terrifies me, is that we're handing control of how we reason about the world around us to somebody like Sam Altman or OpenAI or a small group of people. We are literally creating a new theocracy. And to go back to the earlier points, I mean, we're not even establishing the capabilities in schools to do the critical thinking, to be challenging what we're being told. We're walking into basically a new theocracy where if you come up with a term like, I think that species change over time. If you imagine it was the printing press and paper and the written word was all in the hands of a group of people, you might say, I've come up with this new word called evolution. They could just say no. But I'm going to want to distribute this. No, I want to put it down on a paper. No. And potentially that's the world we're going into. Any thoughts on that? Am I worried too much?
I think Kat says you're not worried enough, if anything.
Yeah, I'd agree with Kat on that. I mean, it's a bigger problem than that. I mean, basically, it's the training data sets that matter. I mean, look at Scholastic Parrots and stuff like that. It's been the training data sets that matter for 20 years. And at the moment, they're all being written by misogynist white males who take Ayn Rand seriously after puberty. Yeah, which, as far as I'm concerned, is grounds for commitment to a mental hospital. Yeah, and you can see that starting to build in. So the danger is that we're getting into Deleuzian terms, an assemblage is forming that people can't escape from, in which the political structure is imposed on you by the nature of the interactions you're permitted to make.
Okay, and
can I say one thing? Sorry, Simon. I'm sorry to be an interrupter.
No, you're
but
not.
I think that Dave left the door open for me to talk about the contract with America, which I believe that Roger might have something to say about as well, maybe a little teensy bit. Um, so for those of you who don't know, who are not Americans or not Americans who know things about Newt Gingrich, which I recommend you shouldn't know things about Newt Gingrich, but he had this contract with America, and one of the things, and he says, we have this contract with America, we have to be responsible with money, blah, 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 blah. And that's a really faithful interpretation. Anyway, yes. So one of the things was he said we have to scale back congressional staff. Those people are waste, like incumbents always win. And so they accumulate this congressional staff. What a bunch of turds. What kind of contract with America is that? So they get rid of them. And so now there's less staff for each of the committees who, does things like hypothetically regulates AI or whatever else. There's less staff for those committees. So that sucks, right? Because who's doing the research? Who's writing the policy? Do you want to guess? It is the people that the policy should be exercised on, right? Or the groups that the policy will regulate. So whether that is like the lobbyists for those companies, or that is even the areas of the government that are actually staffed, right? And the regulation should be on them, but then they have the staff to then write the regulation, or whatever special interest groups. And I think that is something that we don't pay attention to enough. Now, the United States, whether we like it or not, we set the tone for a lot of things that happen in the world. And now congressional staffs are so small. And what do our congressional representatives use those staffs for? What do we all love? We love AOC videos, right? We love like a spicy Katie Porter tweet with a whiteboard, like all of that kind of stuff, right? So now congressional staffs are not writing policy, and they're not researching a lot of the time for the people who are creating the policy that is setting us up for the future in these spicy regulatory spaces, right? They are doing social media so that those people can get reelected again in 2 years. So then we have just this congressional representatives world is shaped by those social media algorithms. And meanwhile, our policy is being written by the people that it is meant to regulate. So maybe I am as cynical as Dave. I'm not sure.
You've got another 30 years on me to refine it properly, Kat. So you'll get there.
Maybe I'll just like reverse back.
There's actually, I think you can go back. The politics thing, I mean, we spent a lot of time on that, and I had to read Trump's tweets every morning for 4 years, which I'm still recovering from, right? And from the righteous indignation withdrawal symptoms, when he was banned. But I think one of the things we're looking at in politics, and it was the guy who did the film All Looked After by Machines of Loving Grace, did a brilliant movie on this. The politics became marketing, not conviction. So instead of saying, this is what I believe in, do you agree with me? It became, what can I say, which means you will vote for me? Right? And that's a really important switch. And that's one of the problems. And if you could get, and I think, we talked about this before, Simon, if you can get that back to more local level, you could have more conviction politics. But the level of politician, the level of the market size we've now got, it's what will get me elected. And I completely agree with Kat on this. And it's what the 25 project is about. It's removing anybody from the equation who could possibly look at things rationally.
See, I guess my take on it, for what it's worth, is that every game gets gamed, right?
Mm-hmm. Anything
what the politicians figured out is how to play the game in a more sophisticated way, and this whole sort of what they sort of said is, hey man, if I can segment the audience and figure out how to cobble together 51% by giving some of this and some of that, it doesn't have to be coherent or anything. That's an easier way. That's sort of planning, right? As opposed to I have conviction and I am going to try and convince people that my conviction is meritorious and I'm going to win on the basis of that. That's harder. right? It takes some creativity and the like. And if you want sort of this more simple route to success, you play that game, and the game is getting ever more sophisticated. Ballot harvesting, that's a sophisticated way to play the game. Is it like good for anybody? No, other than the person getting elected, but it is. And then, you know, all of those machinations. So the only kind of games I think that survive over a long period of time are ones whose rules get adjusted over time. And I've made this point. I mean, this is too American probably, but about the difference between baseball and football, what Americans call football. And football has taken over completely as the winning sport in terms of every measure that you want, and baseball has sort of gone largely sideways. Baseball has had only 2 consequential rule changes in the last 75 years. The NFL has a competition committee that looks at how the game was played and who was gaming the game to win, and just makes rule changes that the people who figured out how to game the game are not very happy about, but it's in the interest of keeping it a game that works, right? And so I think the game of politics has been gamed to an ever greater extent, and we're heading into a kind of a cul-de-sac or over a cliff, whichever way you want to think about it.
If you look at rugby union, the laws are changed virtually every year.
Everything? Okay.
Yeah. And remember, American gridiron evolved from rugby because the American college thought rugby was too difficult. So the rules change every year, and that changes the game in practice. There's another thing on that. I wrote an article with a sergeant in Coldicutt, and the title was "We play football, they play soccer." And the basic argument was American football, and coming back to your point you made up front, everything is about the plan and the game plan, and nobody can vary it. Whereas in soccer and rugby, you have to adjust from defense to offense, and you can't call on a different team. And that was actually talking about American army strategy, right? And I think that's the issue. If the system constantly varies, it's like bee swarming, all right? So you've got the waggle dance of bees, but there are bees which disrupt the dance of other bees. And if you don't get that disruption, a system can never optimize.
Yeah.
Well, it's also about the balance in the system. By that, I mean, if you look at the role of government, government has 2 values that it needs to balance. One is exclusion. So we need exclusion in order to have property. Hence, we have property laws, but it's my property, not your property. And we need property in order to have trade and in order to have a market. So on one side, government has to balance the need for exclusion within the system. But on the other side, we have these ideas of inclusion, fairness, and opportunity. So the role of government is actually balancing continuously the needs of exclusion and the needs of inclusion. And if you go, often we used to yo-yo slightly from one side to another side. I've got to say that certainly in the UK, and we've certainly been heading quite heavily towards the exclusion focus. So it's always everything, investment is always about growth, it's always about the market, and has been much less so on that sort of societal base, and partly because of our political system have been almost captured by the market as well. How do we, and this is only going to get worse with AI, because unfortunately with the same sort of bias in terms of bias towards the market rather than society can be found actually within AI, mostly because it's trained on market data. So how do we in this world of, it's somewhat gloomy here, we don't understand our environment. Strategy is a complete mess. We're handing everything over to AI. We can't think, and we don't even teach critical thinking. And our governments have been sort of captured and heading towards growth, which is basically doomed society. How do we get ourselves out of this?
Well, I can tell you what we're trying to do, all right? So the big project we're working on, and we've done it in 5 countries now, we're now looking for funding to do it worldwide, is to get young people to be ethnographers through their schools into their communities every week. So we start to look at the input and we start to look at things through the eyes of people because, we get pattern in trained early 20s female, late 20s male, and then it's almost impossible to change people. Right. So, I mean, that's what we're saying is you've got to change the thing at a micro level. You've got to have people, and if you can create empathy, and we did this in Northern Ireland in the 70s, we threw Protestants and Catholics in small groups into the slums of Rio de Janeiro. And we let them discover they had something in common and have a conversation about their differences by changing the context. We didn't get them into a room and preach to them. And that's my problem on climate change. We got doom and dire prognostication preachers all over the place, which is sending people into a state of learned helplessness. So I think, and this is substrate, you've got to change the interactions at a micro level, and you've got to change the way, you've got to increase the empathy, because what the internet is an unbuffered feedback loop. And to quote my friend in the Mounties, all right, it used to be every village had an idiot and it didn't matter because everybody knew who the idiot was. But now the idiots have banded together on the internet to legitimize idiocy and to elect a president of the United States, to give an addition on that, all right? And I think that's the problem. Unbuffered feedback loops always produce perverse results.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mean, I do think that human beings are born with a lot of creativity and the ability for abductive logic, because their data set is so small when they're a little baby. So they just have to make sense of scant tiny bits of data. What does this mean? And they're interested in staying alive. And so they're sort of pragmatic. To the extent that we can stop the world and the formal systems in it from bashing that out of them systematically, which is what it's designed to do. Education is designed to bash that out of kids, abductive logic, creativity, ability to think critically. And so if we can reverse that, that would be probably the best thing we can do. But there are a lot of people who have got a lot of vested interests in that not happening. The people who want order and control don't want a lot of creative, free-thinking kind of people in the system. It messes it up. And again, I don't love crazies banding together on the internet, but would I am absolutely terrified by British and European hate speech laws. I'm terrified. To me, it's the most terrifying thing that the world has seen since Hiroshima.
And it's legitimizing. I think that's the problem. It's in complexity terms, it's a phase shift. It went from nobody would say that to all of a sudden everybody can say it. And then you've got people like Farage in the UK trying to pretend that he's just been an ordinary Joe, but actually doing the hate speech. And you can see I mean, if you study the Weimar Republic, it's kind of like mirrored all the way through.
Yeah, but the law, it's terrifying. That law, it scares the living daylights out of it.
You mean in the UK we have a negative right to speech, so you're free to say whatever you wish, but you're not free from responsibility. Yeah. So you're free to say whatever you want.
That's the nicest possible way of describing what's happening.
Well, that's what we've grown up with.
Somebody is now kind of able to say what you said should cause you to be put in jail.
Oh, there's an interest. We're actually passing a law in Wales. We have a Senate. We have quasi-independence from the buggers over the border, that politicians can be sued if they lie with malicious intent. So lying is different from free speech. I think that's the point. Now, that doesn't mean, you've got to be careful on that, but a deliberate lie and a deliberate mistruth is really damaging, and allowing people to do that is really scary.
But that's so for me, that sounds quite a sensible, because I like the UK system where you are free to say whatever you wish, you have freedom of speech, but you do not have freedom from responsibility. So if you say something and it's against one of our various laws, hate laws or whatever, you will suffer the consequences. Which, you know, somebody in the UK, that seems perfectly reasonable. You shouldn't say things which are, but Roger, you're concerned about how far we've gone with those laws.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm terrified. I'm absolutely terrified, because I mean, I'm a James Buchanan guy at heart, and he talked about private choice and public choice markets, and we often have private choice markets that we don't like the results of. Right? We say, well, you know, the private choices that are made out there don't leave enough low-cost housing.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't like it. There's a market failure. And so we're going to create an alternative. And what he describes, I think, aptly as a public choice market. And he simply asks the question, did we subject the mechanisms of the public choice market to as much scrutiny as we did the private choice market? So we create low-cost housing. It gets distributed on the basis of how friendly are you to the politician. There's massive amounts of graft and everything, right? And no problem ever gets solved. It's never solved. It's never made housing more available. We've spent tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars on it. And so he wasn't for or against any of that, right? The Nobel laureate that he was. He just said, just scrutinize it. And so have we scrutinized who exactly makes the decisions how on what is hate speech? No, we're just going to assume it's going to be taken care of somehow, and all that hatey stuff will stop, and we'll still have the good stuff, and it'll all be fine. No, it isn't. It's going to be a disaster. Europe is closing.
I think we're going to have a
Okay.
profound agreement at that point.
Yeah, well, this is where we
I
get
think
into.
I can reconcile this if I'm allowed. Okay.
Yes,
All
yes,
right.
please do.
Let
Please, I'd
me
love it.
take a crack at it. So for anyone who doesn't know, in the US also, this is the thing, right? We have the Democratic Party who says that like speech, their proposal for how we should regulate social media and podcast platforms who are not responsible for whatever is posted there, right? Is through this decency part of our Communications Act, rather than through like antitrust law or through privacy laws or anything like that. So it is something that is potentially important for you if you're an American on this lovely session right now. But my question is, why is hate speech such a problem right now that we have to have all these laws? Because it's profitable. We've made it profitable. We have systems that they profit off of hate speech, right? Because it drives like outrage, and that drives engagement in the platform. Hate speech, love it, very profitable, right? So my question is, how about we attack those business models? We seek to regulate those business models that make hate speech profitable. If those business models are not viable, then we can go back to the ways that have historically served us for squashing hate speech. But my feeling is that the platforms make hate speech profitable, and that's why we have to have increased regulation, legislation about this. One gal's opinion.
No,
That's
it
fantastic.
would be nice to have, if we're going to have, we should either get rid of Sherman, Clayton, all our antitrust laws because we're not enforcing them.
We
And so it's a
effectively
joke,
have.
joke. No, but we should be explicit. We should just say those are a bad idea. It's they're a joke, and let's let anybody monopolize whatever they want, or we should enforce them. Right? And we're not. And we're not.
I mean, there's a balance on this, and you've got to think where it is. All right. So somebody can use hate speech, and it can actually have almost the same effect of somebody is slashing them with a knife and cause suicide. And we got many cases on that, right? And there has to be, and we call it about enabling constraint. There has to be something which inhibits extreme behavior in any civilized community. You can't just leave it down to individual. I mean, this may be an American, European cultural divide on social activism and communitarianism. But fundamentally, there is a responsibility in groups to contain things. Now, just on this, I did field ethnography in Tea Party communities in the States for my various sins a few decades ago. Now, I remember going back to DC and saying, you guys have got this wrong. They're all socialists. They're not right wing, because they all look after each other. So problems that you think you've got in the big city, they haven't got in those towns, because there are things you do and don't do, and the things you're looked after. And I think that's the micro-macro thing as well. So we need to start to think about this, because it's going to be a multifaceted solution. It's not going to be a single thing.
I would
agree.
agree. And I guess I'm just putting a criteria, right? Which is, if we are going to take this out of a private choice model, because that's what people are saying, the private system, the market system is creating all of this hate speech as an outcome. And Kat is explaining one reason why, but that's the private, and we're going to move it into the public choice sphere. We just have to have a good answer to how we're going to do that, and you know, kind of how we've done it in the United States. It's crystal clear, and Mark Zuckerberg fessed up. Right, we restricted speech that was unpleasant for the government in power. Full stop. That's the only thing about it. That and that government in power said, you can't allow that. That was the public choice model. That scares the living daylights out of me. It absolutely terrifies me. So we got subjected to massive amounts of misinformation. Right? 6 feet, mask, all those things was complete misinformation, because somebody thought it was the information that was good, and somebody was saying, you know, there's some downsides to that vax, and it isn't actually safe. Nobody's demonstrated or proven it's safe or effective, right? That was illegal. That was illegal.
You can
so we got to be careful.
I mean, I'll agree you can go too far in this, and part of the anti-woke reaction is a consequence of going too far. So I buy that politically. But you can say something like deliberately spreading a lie when you know it's a lie. Yeah, we calling people by names which we know will lead to violence. There are things that we know, and we can see the history of humanity. It starts with name calling, and it ends up with concentration camps.
I mean, I'm not saying don't. I'm just saying you better think a hell of a lot more carefully about the public choice model than we did in this last iteration. The public choice model was, we're in charge. Our administration, this is the American one, our administration is in charge, and we will tell all the people that we're going to put you out of business unless you censor exactly what we want to have censored. Because, and here's the reason we should, it's because we think it's right. There was nothing other than it's handy for us.
Europe tends to be smaller countries. I mean, we did a whole bunch of stuff on the Gilead scenario in the States. You've got 2-3 very distinct cultures which are completely separate. And I think, you know, if you look at Scandinavia, you look at the provinces in France, they're small enough to be culturally cohesive. The US is just too big to be culturally cohesive at the moment. So you've got those big dichotomous positions opening up. And I think the other trouble is there seems to be an innate Manichaeism in US thinking, and it applies to management as well, by the way. All these 2-column things with evil things on the left and wonderful things that will happen if I work with you on the right. That Manichaean tendency of evil and good is a very prevalent one.
Fascinating. I mean,
but the same thing happened in Canada entirely, right? If not worse. And Canada's a tenth the size of the US, and it isn't American. It's British, French, and a hugely immigrant country. One of the wonderful things about my home country.
Nice.
And nice, and absolutely same, if not more severe, censorship happens. So it's not American.
So this conversation in terms of speech is also exactly the same conversation in terms of AI. So in the AI space, it's all, you know, as we talked about, it influences or controls our ability to reason about it. So how do we govern and protect this space? Do we just hand over to private companies and create a new theocracy where they tell us how to reason about the world? Or maybe we need to put in guardrails, which is, okay, a government action, but who is setting those guardrails? Who is going to, so there is the other path, which many of us would argue for, which is opening the whole lot. And that includes all the training data and all, because training data are symbolic instructions, so open source everything. And of course, we've got all the lobbyists going out at the moment in arms saying, if you do that, you'll get Skynet and we'll all die. And that's the real danger. So don't do that. What you want are nice people who will tell you what it's safe to reason. So this issue of speech is hitting exactly the same problems in that space. How do we have a way of thinking about this? Is there a way through this problem?
So if you make medical insurance decisions based on training data sets based on white males in California, is that legitimate? Even if you'd make it open source?
Well, the thing about making the training data all open source is it starts therefore to become easier to, or potentially easier to find biases within the systems as it currently stands at the moment. Your model is the equivalent of a compiled binary, where from some of not only the code but symbolic instructions embedded in the training data. So it becomes much more difficult to identify the biases, except for experimenting with the things and then working out the biases that way.
Yeah.
So now that then there is a question of is the training data itself represented? And that's one that's been going on for some time.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my perspective on it is we've got an object lesson in the internet of lack of regulation / no regulation. And so if we have that object lesson and what's happened, I think for AI, you know, there's a lesson there. And like, I guess I don't know. My perspective on it is there's always been regulation, right? Families have regulations, right? Some have really more stricter regulations than others. Religions have regulations. Governments picked up from families and religions the idea of regulating. I think made sense because it was natural, and they've regulated, and so the question just is, can you have kind of intelligent, productive regulation? It's tough. It's tough as hell. And so do I think we should let AI be as unregulated as the internet and somehow hope that something better is going to happen? You know, kind of no. So I think we need to have ways of thinking about it that are in keeping with society's interests, needs, and wants, just like we regulate automobiles and airlines and nuclear power plants and everything. This sort of idea that because it's a new technology, it should be allowed to do whatever the hell it wants, I think is sort of it's inconsistent with the history of people on the planet. Other than that, it's a great idea. So I think we should. It's going to be hard though. It's going to be hard as heck.
So, Kat, we've got 2 minutes left.
Yeah.
We've gone from, strategy is completely wrong through, we lack situational awareness, choices matter more than sort of detailed plans. The whole scenario planning is a complete fraud anyway. AI is going to create a new theocracy. We're pretty much all doomed on that space. We've handed over control already. We should have open sourced it, including all the training data at the beginning, but we didn't do so. We're falling into the same old traps that we're doing with free speech. Basically, we're all heading towards hell in a handbasket. So you've got a minute now. Can you just give us the solution and then we can get on?
Absolutely. I have one ready for you.
Thank you.
I challenge everyone here, the people today, you have all proved that you all care deeply and you have very different points of view. We experience that throughout the day. We're experiencing that right now in this fireside chat, right? But what I can say universally about this community is that people really deeply care, right? So I wonder, what if people who really deeply care aspire to power in the way that people who don't aspire to power? What if people who think that their conception of who they are is a person situated in a community, what if those types of people aspired to power more than they currently do? I wonder what that would do for policy, or what that would do for the trajectory of these companies that are steering these technologies. And that's something that every single one of us can do when we leave here today is, okay, I am a person who cares. How can I aspire to power? Or how can I find my people and advocate for them and sponsor them? And that's the challenge that I offer to all of you peoples.
Perfect. Kat,
Nicely
that
done,
was
Kat.
absolutely wonderful. To everybody else, get involved. Obviously, we need to change our political systems. So fantastic, Kat. Thank you so much. Roger, absolute delight. Fabulous conversation. Real pleasure to have you here. I hope you've enjoyed it. Really fascinating.
I have.
The whole
I have.
difference in viewpoints. We often get these in these fireside chats. So thank you so much.
Everybody told me that I would like you and vice versa, and that's absolutely true. Let's figure out how to do more stuff.
Oh, thank you. And I've got to say, I do hope people go and read The Execution Trap. I know you say that not enough people have read it. They should do. It certainly changed my entire perspective. So here's a big call out to The Execution Trap. Please go and read it and tell everybody about it. Dave, as always, it's a pleasure. I mean, it's a delight to talk with you. So many interesting experiences and so many different spaces. So thank you ever so much for coming along. And to everybody else, to everybody else who stayed, I just want to say thank you for coming along to Matt Camp. It was a real pleasure. And hopefully see you all in 2 years' time. And that is a wrap.
Thank you and bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you all.
Thank you, gentlemen. Catch you later.
Yep.
Thank you.